When your K9 German Shepherd brings home a Leopard, and they become best friends. In the quiet hills of Montana, a retired K9 German Shepherd named Max lived a life of discipline, loyalty, and unshakable courage. He had served years on the front lines, protecting lives and standing fearless in the face of danger. But no one could have predicted what he would bring home one fateful afternoon. Instead of returning with a stick or a stray shoe like most dogs, Max came back with something that left his family frozen in disbelief. A leopard cub, fragile and scared, resting gently between his jaws. What began as shock soon turned into a story of resilience, unexpected friendship, and a bond so unbreakable it would change everyone's lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us share more inspiring and emotional stories with you. Stories of courage, loyalty, and incredible moments when animals teach us what true friendship really means. Stay with us until the end, because what Max and the leopard proved together will not only leave you in awe, but will also remind you the hidden power of trust and love. The late summer sun was sinking behind the pine-covered ridges of Montana, painting the horizon in shades of amber and deep purple. On the porch of a modest ranch house sat Daniel Hayes, a 42-year-old former deputy sheriff. His boots were dusty, his shirt rolled at the sleeves, and beside him rested the dog that had been his partner through 100 dangerous nights. Max, an 11-year-old German shepherd with silver streaks around his muzzle, but eyes still sharp as ever. Daniel leaned back, sipping his coffee. Retirement had come for both of them, though Max still carried himself with the discipline of a working K9. Every sound in the distance made his ears perk. Every shadow made him alert. Old habits die hard. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured, scratching the dog's neck. "You've earned the right to relax." But Max wasn't listening. His nose twitched, his head lifted, and then, without warning, he bolted off the porch and disappeared into the trees. Daniel frowned. Max never ran off like that. He waited, calling out once or twice, but silence answered him. Minutes passed. A thin unease settled in his chest. Finally, he stood, grabbing his flashlight. "Max!" he called again, his voice echoing down the valley. Then, just as he was about to step into the tree line, he saw movement. Max emerged from the shadows, moving carefully, deliberately. Daniel's first thought was that his old partner had caught a rabbit or maybe cornered a raccoon. But when Max stepped into the glow of the porch light, Daniel froze. Dangling gently from Max's jaws was a leopard cub. The cub couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Its fur was spotted gold, its eyes wide with fear, its tiny body trembling with every breath. But it wasn't struggling. It wasn't fighting to break free. Instead, it hung there calmly, as though trusting the dog carrying it. Daniel's coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the porch. What in God's name? Max padded forward, careful not to harm the fragile bundle. He laid the cub down on the porch boards, then sat beside it, his chest rising and falling proudly, as though he had just delivered the most important catch of his life. Daniel knelt slowly, his mind racing. Leopards weren't native to Montana. He had heard rumors of exotic animal trafficking in the region, people keeping wildcats illegally, but never in his life had he expected to see one face to face, let alone on his porch, delivered by his own dog. The cub mewed softly, a pitiful, high-pitched sound. Max nudged it with his nose, then looked up at Daniel, eyes steady, almost commanding. "Help it." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Max, what did you do?" The responsible part of his mind screamed at him. This was dangerous. Leopards grew into predators. Authorities would have to be called. But another part, the part that had trusted Max through shootouts in dark alleys, told him to wait. Max wouldn't bring danger to his doorstep without reason. He carried the cub inside, setting it gently in a crate lined with old blankets. Max followed, refusing to leave its side. Daniel studied the two of them, his heart pounding with confusion and awe. Over the next hours, Daniel pieced together fragments of possibility. Maybe the cub's mother had been killed. Maybe it had escaped from some private collector. Whatever the case, it was weak, dehydrated, and clearly alone. Without intervention, it wouldn't last the night. Daniel fetched a bowl of water, dipping his fingers and guiding the cub toward it. At first, it refused. Then Max did something extraordinary. He lapped at the water, then nudged the cub closer, repeating the action until the tiny leopard mimicked him. Slowly, cautiously, the cub began to drink. Daniel sat back heavily in his chair, staring at the scene before him. His old K9 partner, the fiercest German shepherd he had ever known, was teaching a leopard cub how to survive. As the hours ticked by, a strange peace filled the house. Max curled around the crate, his body forming a protective wall. The cub pressed against him through the bars, its small paws reaching as it anchored itself to the bigger animal. Daniel knew this was only the beginning of something he couldn't fully grasp yet. Questions would come. Where had the cub come from? What danger lurked behind its sudden appearance? And what would happen when it grew into the predator it was destined to be? But in that moment, he didn't care. All he saw was his old partner, the loyal dog who had never failed him, making a choice to protect something fragile and wild. Before turning off the light, Daniel whispered to himself, This is going to change everything. And deep inside, he sensed he was right. By sunrise, Daniel Hayes was already pacing his kitchen floor, coffee forgotten on the counter, his mind a storm of questions. The little leopard cub slept curled against Max, its spotted flank rising and falling in fragile rhythm. Max had refused to move all night, his body stretched across the floor, like a sentry guarding something precious. Daniel rubbed his temples. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he muttered, staring at the cub. The sensible voice in his head gave him the obvious answer. Call animal control, call the sheriff, call someone. Leopards weren't supposed to exist in the forests of Montana. Keeping one in his home was madness. But each time he reached for his phone, he looked at Max, those steady amber eyes, that protective stance, and his hand froze. Max had chosen to save this cub, and Daniel couldn't bring himself to betray that trust. By mid-morning, the cub was awake again, mewing in its tiny, plaintive voice. Daniel scrambled to find something it could eat. He searched his fridge, finally pulling out a carton of milk. As he poured it into a shallow bowl, he hesitated. "Do leopards even drink cow's milk?" he muttered. The cub sniffed, licked once, and then turned away. Max huffed, gave Daniel a pointed look, and nudged the cub with his nose until it returned to the bowl. Awkwardly, the cub began to lap, though Daniel could tell it wasn't enough. Later, when he drove into town for supplies, his nerves were stretched tight. He stopped at a small feed store, scanning shelves, grabbing puppy formula, droppers, and blankets. The woman at the counter raised an eyebrow. "Raising another litter, Danny?" He forced a smile. Something like that. When he returned home, he mixed the formula and held the dropper carefully to the cub's mouth. This time, success, the cub latched on greedily, gulping down the liquid. Max hovered close, tail wagging slowly, as if he were supervising. But as the day wore on, Daniel realized this wasn't going to stay a secret for long. That evening, his neighbor, Frank Miller, stopped by. Frank was a rancher in his late 50s, a man with a suspicious nature and little patience for surprises. He leaned against the porch rail, squinting toward the sound of faint mewing inside. "What's that noise?" Frank asked. Daniel's stomach tightened. "Stray kitten. Max dragged it in last night." Frank snorted. "That mutt of yours bringing home kittens now? Must be getting soft." Daniel forced a laugh, though sweat prickled his neck. "Yeah, guess retirement's changing him." When Frank left, Daniel exhaled hard. He knew the truth couldn't be hidden forever. A leopard cub wasn't a stray cat. As it grew, its claws would sharpen, its teeth would lengthen, and no crate or blanket would disguise what it was. That night, as the cub nestled into Max's thick fur, Daniel sat on the couch, staring at the two of them. His thoughts churned. He remembered his years on the force, the rules, the codes, the way everything had always been black and white. But now, looking at the bond forming before his eyes, the lines blurred. The cub wasn't just surviving. It was thriving under Max's care. Max, the disciplined K9 who once lunged at criminals with iron jaws, was now grooming the tiny predator with fatherly patience, licking its ears until the cub purred in soft relief. Still, Daniel's unease grew. He called an old friend, Sheriff Collins, under the pretense of catching up. You ever hear about exotic animals being smuggled through Montana? He asked casually. Collins grunted. More than I'd like. Folks trying to raise big cats, bears, even wolves. Dangerous business. If you see anything, you call me. Daniel hesitated, then lied. Haven't seen a thing. Just curious. When he hung up, he stared at the phone in guilt. He should have told the truth. But how could he, when Max had clearly chosen this path? Over the next week, life on the ranch began to change. Daniel found himself setting alarms to feed the cub at night, buying raw chicken from the butcher, scouring the internet for any scrap of information on raising big cats. He even found himself laughing again, a sound that had been rare since his retirement. Max, meanwhile, seemed reborn. Where age had once slowed him, responsibility energized him. He patrolled the property with renewed vigor, the cub toddling behind him like a spotted shadow. When hawks circled overhead, Max stood tall, placing himself between the cub and the sky. But the outside world was closing in. One morning, Daniel found tire tracks near his property line. Unfamiliar, heavy. He scanned the tree line, unease crawling through him. Someone had been watching. That night, as the cub slept soundly against Max, Daniel sat by the window with his old service pistol laid on the table beside him. His instincts, honed by years of law enforcement, whispered danger. If the cub had come from traffickers, they wouldn't let it go so easily. He looked at Max, at the way the dog curled protectively around the little leopard, and felt a chill. He had faced armed criminals, raging fires, and storms that split the sky. But this was different. This was personal. And deep down, Daniel knew. Their unusual family was about to be tested in ways he had never imagined. The moon hung low over the Montana Valley, its pale light spilling across the ranch like a quiet warning. Daniel Hayes sat at his kitchen table, the old service pistol still within arm's reach, his eyes heavy from lack of sleep. Every creak in the house made him tense. Outside, Max patrolled the yard with the vigilance of a soldier still on duty, his shadow cutting across the porch as he circled. The leopard cub, exhausted from a day of stumbling play, slept curled on an old quilt near the fireplace. For a brief moment, Daniel allowed himself to exhale. The sight of Max resting his chin protectively over the cub's small body softened him in ways he couldn't explain. This wasn't just an old K9 guarding a wild animal. It was a bond forming, something fragile but powerful. But peace never lasted long. Near midnight, Max stiffened. His ears pricked, nose twitching. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Daniel was on his feet instantly, pistol in hand, moving to the window. There, faint headlights bobbing in the distance along the dirt road. They cut through the darkness. Too slow to be casual, too deliberate to be innocent. Daniel's gut tightened. He killed the interior lights and crouched by the window. The vehicle stopped near his property line. Two silhouettes climbed out, their movements cautious. One carried a flashlight, sweeping it across the field. "Damn it," Daniel muttered. Max snarled, pressing his body between the window and the cub. The men lingered for several minutes, shining lights across the ground, studying tracks. Then one of them knelt, pointing toward the prints left by the cub earlier that day. Even from the distance, Daniel could see it, the realization. These men weren't curious neighbors. They were hunters. When they finally retreated to their truck, Daniel's relief was short-lived. They would be back. And next time, they wouldn't leave empty-handed. By morning, Daniel was pacing again. He considered calling Sheriff Collins, confessing everything. But a voice inside told him not to. If the cub fell into official hands, it would likely be shipped off, caged in a zoo, or worse, destroyed. And he couldn't do that to Max. The dog had chosen this mission. Instead, Daniel doubled down on preparations. He reinforced the barn doors, checked the fencing, and kept his pistol close. Max shadowed him, eyes constantly scanning the tree line, the cub trotting happily between them, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around it. That afternoon, Frank Miller reappeared. His sharp eyes darted around the property. "Saw a strange truck out by your land last night," he said. "Didn't look like tourists." Daniel forced calm into his voice. "I'll keep an eye out." Frank's gaze lingered, suspicion simmering. Then he nodded slowly. You always were good at keeping secrets, Danny. Don't let this one bite you. As the sun dipped low, Daniel sat on the porch, watching the cub clamber clumsily over Max's back. The old shepherd tolerated it with surprising patience, occasionally nudging the cub into place with his nose. Their play was almost comical, predator and protector, bound by something neither of them should have understood, but somehow did. Still, Daniel's mind churned. These men traffickers no doubt wouldn't stop. Somewhere out there, someone had lost a cub worth thousands on the black market, and people willing to traffic wild animals weren't the kind to knock politely. That night, his fears proved right. Around 2 in the morning, Max erupted into furious barking. Daniel bolted upright, pistol in hand, heart hammering. He rushed to the window. 2 figures were moving fast across the yard, their flashlights slicing through the dark. The cub squealed, startled awake. Max lunged forward, teeth bared, his deep growl cutting to the night like thunder. "Get the dog!" one of the men shouted. Daniel didn't hesitate. He stepped onto the porch, pistol raised. "One more step, and you'll regret it." The men froze, beams of light locking on him. Silence hung heavy. "We're here for what's ours," one of them sneered. "Hand over the cat, and no one gets hurt." Daniel's voice was steady, though rage burned inside him. "That cub doesn't belong to you. Turn around before I decide to prove it." Max snarled louder, his body coiled like a spring. The cub pressed against his side, trembling. The men muttered curses, retreating slowly toward their truck. "This isn't over," one spat. "You can't hide it forever." When the headlights finally disappeared into the distance, Daniel lowered his pistol, his chest heaving. He sank onto the porch steps, Max pressing against his leg, the cub climbing onto his lap. For a long time, none of them moved. Daniel stroked the cub's soft fur, whispering, "What have we gotten ourselves into?" Max leaned closer, eyes steady, as if to answer, "We finished what we started." As dawn broke, Daniel knew one thing for certain. This was no longer about convenience or curiosity. This was a battle. And protecting the cub wasn't just Max's mission anymore. It was his too. The hunters would return, stronger, angrier, more desperate. And when they did, Max and Daniel would be ready. The following days blurred together in a haze of tension. Daniel hardly slept, his body running on coffee and adrenaline. Each night, he patrolled the porch with his old pistol, while Max roamed the perimeter with the intensity of a soldier on deployment. The cub, now stronger, more playful, was oblivious to the danger surrounding it. It pounced clumsily on Max's tail, wrestled with old work gloves Daniel tossed into its crate, and napped curled against the shepherd's warm chest. But Daniel couldn't escape the truth. They were living on borrowed time. On the 3rd night, the threat became real again. It started with the coyotes. Their howls echoed unnaturally close. But when Daniel grabbed his flashlight and scanned the tree-line, their glowing eyes seemed to scatter too quickly, too organized. He cursed under his breath. Coyotes didn't move like that. These were men, using the cover of night to close in. "Max," he whispered. The shepherd was already alert, hackles raised, his growl low and steady. The cub pressed against him, ears flattened in confusion. Daniel checked the pistol at his side and moved toward the barn, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at him. This is it. Then it happened. The crackle was splintering. A shadow darted along the fence line. Another figure appeared near the barn door, crowbar in hand. "Back off," Daniel shouted, raising his weapon. The men froze, but only for a moment. One of them stepped forward, hands raised mockingly. "We don't want trouble, old man. Just a cat. Hand it over and we're gone." Max lunged forward with a bark so fierce it echoed across the valley. The cub squealed, ducking behind him. Daniel steadied his aim. "Take one more step, and you'll never leave this property." For a tense moment, the air crackled with the possibility of violence. Then, headlights appeared in the distance. A truck barreled down the road, gravel spraying beneath its tires. The intruders cursed, retreating fast into the trees before the vehicle arrived. Daniel held his breath until the truck pulled into the driveway. Relief washed over him when Sheriff Collins stepped out, his wide frame silhouetted in the glare. "Danny," The sheriff said grimly. I had a call about gunshots in the valley. Thought I'd check on you. His gaze swept over the tense yard. The armed man on the porch, the German shepherd bristling with rage. Daniel lowered the pistol, but said nothing. Colin's eyes narrowed. What's going on here? Daniel hesitated, his mind spinning. He could lie, say it was coyotes. But Collins wasn't a fool. He'd been a brother in arms for too many years. Finally, Daniel exhaled. You better come inside. Inside the house, Collins stopped dead in his tracks. The cub blinked up at him from its place on the quilt, tail flicking, spots gleaming in the lamplight. Good Lord, Collins muttered. Max stood protectively over the animal, his body tense but his gaze unwavering. Collins turned slowly to Daniel. You realize what this means? You're harboring an exotic predator. This is illegal. Danny, dangerous. Daniel rubbed his face. I know. Believe me, I know. But Max found him alone in the woods. He's just a baby. If I turn him over, he'll end up in a cage or worse. And those men out there? They'll kill for him. Collins studied him for a long moment. His eyes softened slightly. You always did have a way of walking straight into trouble. Not trouble, Daniel said quietly. A responsibility. Max chose to protect him. And I can't betray that. The sheriff sighed, heavy with conflict. I'll buy you time. But if the feds get wind of this, my hands are tied. You understand? Daniel nodded, gratitude flashing in his eyes. Over the next hours, Collins helped set up extra locks, reinforce the barn doors, and place a call to a trusted wildlife rehab center across the state, a place that cared for animals instead of exploiting them. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was hope. By dawn, exhaustion weighed on Daniel like lead. Yet as he watched Max and the cub doze side by side, he felt a strange calm. He wasn't alone anymore. Still, danger wasn't far. That afternoon, Frank Miller stormed onto the porch, face red with fury. You think I don't know what's going on here? He shouted. I saw the tracks myself. That's no kitten. That's a damn leopard. Daniel's blood ran cold. Frank, you're putting us all at risk, Frank snarled. If that thing grows, it'll kill livestock, or worse. I should call the authorities myself. Max growled, stepping between Frank and the doorway. Daniel raised his hands. Frank, listen to me. He's just a cub. He won't hurt anyone, and I won't let him fall into the wrong hands. Frank shook his head. You're blinded by that dog of yours. But this won't end well. He turned sharply and stalked off, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Daniel sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair. Every path ahead seemed fraught with risk. Keep the cub, and enemies would circle closer. Hand it over, and Max's heart would break, and his own along with it. That night, as thunder rolled across the mountains, Daniel sat beside the fire, the cub purring softly in Max's embrace. He reached out, resting a hand on the shepherd's back. We'll find a way, he whispered. We have to. But deep down, he knew the real storm was only beginning. Word count, 9:08. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain hammered against the ranch house, the wind howling through the pines like a warning from the mountain itself. Daniel Hayes sat at the kitchen table with a lantern glowing softly beside him, his service pistol laid out in the open. Max dozed nearby. The leopard cub curled against his chest, both of them oblivious to the world outside. But Daniel couldn't sleep. He knew what was coming. All week, the signs had built like storm clouds. The tracks near his fence line, the whispered threats, Frank Miller's angry visit. The traffickers hadn't given up. They were circling like wolves, waiting for the right moment. And tonight, when the storm massed sound in sight, they would come. Max stirred suddenly, ears pricking, nostrils flaring. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Daniel rose, heart hammering. He crossed the window and peered through the sheets of rain. Headlights cut through the downpour. A truck pulled up near the barn, its engine muted beneath the roar of the storm. Dark figures leapt out, their silhouettes blurred by the rain, but their intent unmistakable. They're here, Daniel whispered. Max barked sharply, waking the cub, who mewed in fright. Daniel grabbed his pistol, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He turned to Max, stay with him. But the dog was already moving toward the door, muscles tense, every inch of his body ready to defend. Daniel flung the door open, rain lashing his face, and stepped onto the porch. Lightning split the sky, illuminating 3 men advancing across the yard, crowbars and chains in hand. "This ends tonight," one of them shouted over the storm. Daniel raised his weapon. "Not on my land, it doesn't." But before he could fire a warning shot, one of the men lunged. Max shot forward like a bullet, his jaws clamping onto the man's arm. The attacker screamed, stumbling backward as Max held his ground, teeth locked, growl echoing through the storm. The others rushed forward. Daniel fired into the air, the crack of the pistol deafening. "Back off." For a moment they faltered, but greed and desperation pushed them on. One swung a chain at Max. The shepherd dodged, teeth flashing, lunging again. The storm turned the yard into chaos, rain blinding, mud sucking at their boots, the cub wailing from inside the house. Daniel fought like a man possessed. He fired again, the bullets striking the ground near their feet, forcing them to scatter. But one man slipped past him, sprinting toward the porch. Daniel's blood froze. The cub, before he could react, Max broke free from his opponent and hurled himself at the intruder. The shepherd's massive body collided with the man, driving him into the mud. They rolled, Max snapping and snarling, refusing to let him near the door. Then it happened. A shot rang out, louder than thunder. Daniel spun, heart-seizing. The man Max had first tackled was on his knees, a pistol in his shaking hand. "Max!" Daniel roared. The shepherd staggered, his body jerking. For a split second, time froze, rain suspended in the air, lightning frozen in the sky. Then Max straightened, defiant even as blood darkened his fur. He didn't back down. With a final surge of strength, he dragged the intruder away from a porch, tearing the pistol from his hand with a bone-crunching snap of his jaws. Daniel fired then, his shot striking the ground inches from the man's head. "Get off my land," he bellowed. The traffickers, battered and beaten, scrambled back toward their truck. The driver revved the engine, and within seconds they were gone, swallowed by the storm. Daniel dropped to his knees in the mud, rushing to Max's side. The shepherd collapsed against him, his chest heaving, eyes still blazing with that indomitable fire. "Stay with me, boy." Daniel choked, rain mixing with the tears on his face. "You did it. You saved him. Stay with me." Max's ears twitched at his voice. The cub, trembling, crawled out of the house and pressed against Max's neck, its spotted body shaking but alive. Max shifted, weak but protected to the last, curling his body around the cub. Daniel's throat burned. He lifted the dog in his arms, heavier than he remembered, and carried him inside. He worked through the night, cleaning the wound, bandaging, whispering prayers he hadn't spoken since childhood. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed. Golden light streamed through the windows, illuminating the 3 of them huddled together on the floor. Max stirred, his eyes opening slowly. Weak but alive. Relief hit Daniel like a wave. He buried his face in the dog's wet fur, whispering, "You're the bravest soul I've ever known." Over the following weeks, news spread across the valley. Sheriff Collins arrested 2 of the traffickers, though the others slipped away. Frank Miller, after seeing the truth of what Max had done, stopped speaking against Daniel. Instead, he started dropping off meat for the cub, never admitting why, but leaving it on the porch like a peace offering. Life slowly found rhythm again. The cub grew stronger, its legs surer, its eyes brighter. It followed Max everywhere, mimicking his every move. If Max lay in the sun, the cub sprawled beside him. If Max barked at a hawk, the cub hissed and swiped at the air. Together, they became an inseparable pair, unlikely friends bound by survival and love. Daniel often sat on the porch, watching them with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He thought about the empire, law, and order he had once served, the rules he had lived by, but none of it had prepared him for this. The lesson his old partner had taught him. Max hadn't seen a predator when he found the cub. He hadn't seen danger or profit. He had seen something small, scared, and worth protecting. And in doing so, he had reminded Daniel the truth he had long forgotten. Real strength is not in power or control, but in compassion. Months later, when the wildlife rehab center finally had a place ready, Daniel faced the hardest decision of his life. He loaded the cub gently into a travel crate, Max watching with mournful eyes. The leopard pressed its nose to the crate's bars, whimpering as Max nudged it one last time. The drive was silent, heavy with unspoken words. But when they arrived, Daniel saw wide-open enclosures, expert caretakers, and a future where the cub would grow into what was meant to be. He opened the crate. The cub hesitated, then turned back to Max, pressing its small face against the shepherd's muzzle. For a moment, predator and protector lingered, their bond unbreakable even as distance pulled them apart. Then the cub leapt forward into its new world. Daniel knelt, wrapping an arm around Max. "You did it, boy. You gave him a chance." Max leaned into him, tired but proud. His mission was complete. As the sun dipped low, Daniel whispered, "You didn't just save him, Max. You saved me too." And in that moment, he knew the story of a dog and a leopard would live on forever. Not as a tale of fear, but as a reminder of the courage to love beyond boundaries. If this story touched your heart, remember, courage and compassion can break barriers that fear builds. Max and the cub remind us that true friendship knows no limits. Not species, not size, not circumstance. If this story inspired you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who believes in the power of loyalty and love. Together, we can spread stories of hope that the world desperately needs.